Alright, so this is the rules of Ultimate, sort of breaking down the detailed 11th edition rules from the Ultimate USA Ultimates sort of rule book. What we need to know on the field, sort of in video form. I'll be doing a little bit of drawing, a little bit of writing, whatever, but just to sort of break it down a little bit. So Ultimate's based on spirit of the game, this sort of notion that it's an unofficiated sport, the players are making the calls, there are no referees, and so it's expected that we'll sort of take the high road when we're playing the game, making calls if someone feels like they were fouled or there was some sort of violation that took place. You know, a conversation should sort of take place to explore that. It's based on fair play, honoring yourself, honoring the game, honoring the competitors itself. So, in terms of the field of Ultimate, obviously got two end zones, right? End zone depth is 25 yards. Distance between the end zones, 70 yards. And then the width of the field is about 40 yards. And that's sort of what we're dealing with in terms of the perimeter line. The line itself is out, and a player can't run into the end zone with a disc. Also sidelines, if a player has the disc on the sideline, they can sort of, if the sideline's being obstructed, they can ask people to move away from the sideline, spectators and things like that. Anyway, games are played to typically 15. We'll win by 2. That's sort of the expectation. If time starts to become an issue at a tournament or during a game, and a soft cap is blown, that just means, you know, add 2 to the existing, the higher of the 2 scores on the field. A hard cap, if the hard cap signal is blown during a game, that just means while that point is happening, once that point is finished, add 1 to the higher of the 2 points, and whoever gets to that first wins. So each point is started out with a pull. That's just one team basically kicking off to the other. Each team can receive 2 timeouts per half. Only an offensive player can call a timeout. When you restart play after a timeout, you do that with a check. It can be a self-check where you tap the disc on the ground. And the stall count then is whatever it was when play stopped or at the timeout plus 1, right? Getting back to this idea of a pull, substitutions can only happen before the pull. Pullers, both teams need to signal ready before the disc is in the air on the pull. The receiving team needs to sort of line up on their end zone line and hold that position so the pulling team can line up accordingly and match up. And if the pulling team crosses their end zone line before the disc is in the air, that's called an offsides, and they have to redo the pull. So back to timeouts. So each team gets up to 2 per half, but only offense can call it. An injury timeout, anyone on offense can call it, or if there's someone on the defensive team that's injured as well, and the injured person can substitute off, the other team then has the option of also subbing in a new player. So if the injury timeout is called but there's no substitution, and the other team didn't cause that injury, then that team that called the timeout can be charged a team timeout. Sort of a technicality there. Where to play the pull is sort of an important point to understand, right? So here's the receiving end zone, right? If a disc is pulled and lands in, you play it where it lies, inside the playing field proper, not the end zone, right? Same thing with the end zone, though. If it lands into the end zone, you play it where it lies, right? If it hits the ground and rolls out before the end zone, you simply bring it back and play it on the end zone line, okay? If it is in the air and flies out the side of the end zone, out the side of the field, out the back, okay? You bring it to what's called the brick mark, okay? In an Ultimate, the brick mark is this sort of imaginary mark, I don't know, about 10 yards in front of the end zone, in the middle of the field. It's called a brick. So the receiving team signals if the disc is going out of bounds in the air. They signal by putting their hands above their head, clapping them together, whatever. They say brick, and then they go grab the disc, bring it to here, and put the disc in play at the brick mark, right? So you play if the disc falls in bounds, you play it where it comes to rest or is caught or stopped. If it rolls out, you bring it to the line before the end zone. No, the line closest to where it went out of bounds. If it's out of bounds, bring it to the brick. Now, if it goes out of bounds, if the pull goes out of bounds sort of before the brick or at an earlier sort of position, shallower position than the brick, you simply bring it to the middle of the field right there. Okay, that's where you field the out of bounds pull. So this idea of checking the disc is simply bringing it back into play after a stoppage. No, everyone needs to assume their position when there was a stoppage of play. They go back to where they were when there was a call or something that stopped play, right? When the situation is resolved, the thrower then picks up the disc, offers it to the person marking them, and the mark can then tap it and say stalling, right? And that's checking it back in. Or the offensive person can self-check it, right? They can pick up the disc. If no one is around, they can establish their pivot foot, just touch the disc to the ground and say in play, right? And that's how you can self-check if no one else is around and you want to start the point after a turnover or bringing a pull in or something like that. More about inbounds, out of bounds, no? The line itself in the field is out, so if you catch a disc and come down and your foot appears to be on the line or is questionable, that might, if your first contact is with the line, that's considered to be out. You may have to defer to someone who has a better perspective, the person who has the best perspective. If there was someone watching where your foot fell, even if they're on the other team, you may have to defer to their opinion on that because it would be considered a best perspective. A player catching a disc near the end zone, if your first contact is on the end zone line or maybe out of the end zone line or it's questionable, and then you move into the end zone with your next point of contact, you run into the end zone, you have to bring it back to the end zone line and play it there, right? A pivoting thrower, so long as their pivot foot is inbounds, can pivot out of bounds, and the foot that they're picking up and stepping with can actually be outside the perimeter of the playing field. The disc can be thrown out of bounds so long as it comes back in to be completed. However, if it's thrown out of bounds and doesn't come back in, then that's a turnover, and the team that takes possession actually takes it back where it was thrown from. So you have to be sort of cautious about throwing big throws out of bounds, because if they never come back in, or if a defender runs out of the playing field and makes a play on it there, prohibiting it from coming back in, then the other team regains possession where it was released from, or where it went out of bounds, rather, sorry. So a defender can go out of bounds to make a play on a disc, and offense can too, but it's out of bounds, so it would be a turnover. But anyone can run out of bounds. Yep, that's that. In terms of scoring in the end zone, if you catch the disc or retain possession of the disc in the end zone proper, that is a goal. Possession or a catch simply means you stop rotation of the disc. If you catch the disc and run into the end zone, you need to bring it back to the end zone line and self-check it right there. You don't have to stop play or anything, but if you realize, I wasn't in, I ran in, bring it back to the line, self-check it there, and continue play. No, if an offensive player loses possession due to a force-out foul or an uncontested foul, that's a goal. So if you make a catch in the end zone and you're fouled, and then you drop the disc, or if you are clearly fouled by the defensive player that's defending you and it inhibits you from catching the disc, or if you jump in the air and catch the disc but the defender bumps you out of bounds before you touch the ground, those are all considered situations in which you are awarded a goal. If the defender contests a foul inside the end zone, then potentially the disc would go back to the thrower. But that is one important sort of clarification. Okay, turnovers. How do turnovers happen? How do we lose possession? Turnovers, a dropped pass. You can't catch your own throw, so if you throw it and then the wind sort of picks it up and it ends up coming back to you, for example, you can't catch it. Someone else needs to touch it first. Obviously, you can't bounce it intentionally off of another person and then catch your own pass. But incidental things like that, where you throw, someone else from the other team, or your team tries to catch it, touches it, and then it comes back to you, you can then catch it. Anything thrown out of bounds or intercepted, or that is dropped upon ground contact is a turnover. So if you dive, you lay out, you make a grab for the disc, and you have both hands on it, you stop rotation, but then when you hit the ground, it bounces out of your hands. That's a turnover. If you are being stalled and the stall count reaches 10 and you don't contest it, if you think, yep, that's true, they got to 10 before I threw the disc, even the first utterance of the word t, the letter t in 10, that's a turnover. Calling a team timeout when you have none remaining is also a turnover, right? Now, if you gain possession of the disc in the end zone you are defending via a turnover, you need to bring it back to the line and check it and establish a pivot foot, or you are entitled to, rather, if the disc is caught by you in the end zone you're defending, or if it's turned over in the end zone you're defending, right? You can grab it and run it up to the end zone line. You don't necessarily have to put it in play where it lies. You can establish a pivot foot right there if you want to hurry things up, but you don't need to. So, stalling, when the mark is counting versus the thrower, right? You can only begin, a mark can only begin the stall count when they are within 3 yards or about 9 feet of the thrower. They initiate the stall count with the word stalling, right? Let them know, hey, I'm starting to count, and then, in a relatively even cadence, about a second apiece, you're counting from 1 to 10, right? The first utterance of the t sound in 10 is a turnover, and at that point, if the thrower does not contest, you can pick it up and check it in as the thrower, or pick it up and have the defender check it right there, or you can simply put the disc can be put on the ground by the thrower, the person who loses possession, and you can touch it and just say in play and then walk away, and someone else can come pick it up, right? You're not obligated to take the disc if you are the one who stalled out the thrower. If the thrower says, hey, wait, you didn't, that was a fast count, you didn't get to 10, and they threw it and it was complete, the disc comes back to the thrower, and you start the stall count at 8. If they hurried up and tried to throw the disc before you hit 10, and you still got to 10, and the disc was incomplete, the throw was incomplete, that's a turnover, right? So if you get to 10 and they kind of chuck it in a haphazard, act of getting rid of the disc, and it hits the ground or goes out of bounds, or the receiver doesn't catch it, that's a turnover, and you play on. If the defense switches a marker, so like, you're on the field being marked, you're the thrower, but then all of a sudden this mark takes off and someone else comes up and sets a different mark, they have to restart the stall count. It begins again at 0. Now, there are a couple ways that the person marking the disc can get into trouble. There are marking violations, right? And if you're the thrower, it helps to be aware of these to be able to call them out, right? First, you can, if you feel like the person is counting fast, say fast count. You say fast count, and they should immediately, whatever their number they're at, take 1 off and continue counting more slowly. Play does not stop for marking violations, and only the thrower can call these. So fast count is 1. Double team. Right? If they have 2 people within 9 feet of the thrower, you can call double team. One of them has to leave, and they take 1 off at the stall count. Right? Disc space is important. You, as the thrower, are entitled to the space of a disc diameter around your body, your core. Right? And so the person marking you can't straddle either of your legs, your pivot leg. They can't encroach that disc length from your body. So if their torso is bumping your torso, you can sort of move a disc between you and say, disc space, you're asking for disc space, and they should respect that. If they don't and they continue bumping, then you could call a marking foul and play would stop. So, but disc space is important because some teams really defend and mark the disc aggressively, and you want to be sure that they're backing off and giving you ample space. The last one, vision blocking, you just want to make sure that they're not holding a hand in front of your eyes or anything like that, and so you can call vision blocking violation, and they should move their hand. It's basically reminding them, hey, you're intentionally getting in my line of sight, and that's not spirited. So, okay. In terms of receiving the disc, if you're a receiver, you're a cutter, and you're the intended receiver and sort of intending to make the catch, here are some considerations, right? Possession means stopping the rotation of the disc. The receiver may bobble the disc to retain possession, but you can't advance the disc purposefully by bobbling it. As soon as you make the catch, stop rotation, you need to come to a complete stop, establish the pivot foot as quickly as possible. If a disc is caught simultaneously by an offensive and defensive players, the disc goes to the offensive player. So that the defender should realize that, oops, we both caught this, it's still their disc, and let go right away. So you can set your pivot foot and begin the next throw, whatever. On discs that, if you're making a play on a disc, you catch it, but then your foot might be out of bounds. If you don't have an idea because you weren't looking at the ground, you can always defer to the best perspective, the person with the best perspective there, whether it's a player on the other team, on your team, someone on the sidelines. Same thing with discs that may be down, that someone thinks they caught and claims they caught, but that really you can hear it hit the grass, or you maybe hear it hit the ground, and sometimes deferring to people with the best perspective is important there. In terms of moving with the disc, if you catch a disc while you're running, you can throw it again without establishing a pivot foot, as long as you don't change directions or speed up, right? And so long as the pass is released before your third step. So if you take 3 steps, 4 steps, and then throw it, that's a travel. If you catch it and then change direction in a sort of arcing turn, or you catch it and speed up, you're probably going to get called for a travel. Other calls, and going about calls, right? There are violations, like marking violations, marking violations. There are also fouls, right? And so we'll talk more about both of those, but there's a concept in Ultimate called the continuation rule. Whenever a call is made, depending on the outcome of the throw that was in motion when the call was made, or what the thrower was doing, whether the disc is caught or turns into a turnover, while that call is being made, while someone's yelling foul or pick or whatever, is going to sort of determine where the disc goes. If the disc goes back to the thrower, if it's a turnover, if you play on, these are all relevant to what we call the continuation rule, right? So, calls on the field. Anyone can make a call if you feel the outcome of a play would have been different without the infraction that you're feeling was sort of took place. You can make the call. If a thrower makes the call during a throw, if they feel they were fouled, but the throw was during the act of throwing, right? If the throw's complete, you just play on. Okay. If the throw is incomplete, out of bounds, hits the ground, is not caught, it comes back to the thrower, right? So anytime there's a foul called on the field, play stops, right? And if the disc is in the air, you have to see what happens. If a call is made away from the disc, right, by an offensive cutter, by a defender downfield, or by the person marking the disc, play stops as always. And typically the disc is going to revert to the thrower. May depend a little bit more on the sort of situation, and we'll talk more about that. But usually, if there's a call and uncontested, the disc will go back to the thrower. If it's a call downfield that did not affect the play directly, however, and this is important, you just yell "play on" and keep going. If there's a foul between two cutters, between a cutter and a defender downfield, and they're outside of the sort of purview of the play, they're not involved, they're just clearing out, then it's important to acknowledge that it happened, but play doesn't stop. You just yell "play on" and keep it moving. If there's a call made that's near the disc, or that's relevant to the what the thrower was intending or something, then play probably needs to stop. Whenever there's stoppage of play based on a foul call or a violation, a foul call specifically, players need to return to where they were when the play stopped or when the call was made. In ultimate, everyone's sort of in motion on the field, and when you hear foul, sometimes we take 3, 4, 5 more steps just to slow down, and we need to go back then and resume our original position. Okay. More about fouls. Fouls in ultimate. Going back to spirit of the game, players should always avoid contact, right? It's upon us, it's incumbent upon us now to really play fairly, to stay out of each other's way. Obviously, some incidental contact is unavoidable, right? If you're running next to someone and you're both running deep for the end zone, sometimes legs get mixed up or ankles, people trip on each other, and it's a spirited sort of, it's an opportunity to if it was really accidental, it wasn't intentional, and it really wasn't to sort of obstruct or prevent a play from being made, then, it's best that a no call be made, right? That said, if you feel like you're making a play on offense toward the disc and the defender that's with you is intentionally getting in your way or in some way impeding you from making a play that's not respecting, the direction you're running in, your speed, or if you're jumping vertically, that space above you, the vertical space, then you have the right to make some calls, right? First category, throwing fouls. These apply directly to the thrower, right? If you're pivoting with the disc and there's non-incidental contact taking place between the thrower and the moving arms and legs of the mark, so that's to say, if the person marking you is swinging their leg or their arm and it's bumping you, it's hitting you or the disc, because the disc is considered to be part of the thrower, right? If the person marking you is not stationary and they're swinging arms or legs and bumping you as you try and throw or fake, that's a throwing foul. If the mark takes an illegal position, meaning they straddle your pivot leg, so if you're right-handed and you plant your left leg as a pivot foot, if they sort of straddle your left leg, inhibiting you from pivoting or preventing you from pivoting, that's a throwing foul, right? Any contact by the thrower with the body on a legal mark is also a throwing foul. So a person marking you can call a foul on you if they are maintaining sort of a legal position away from your pivot leg and they're stationary, and you step through them or step across from a forehand to a backhand and you bump them with their elbow and knock them off balance. That's not uncommon that a person marking a disc will call a throwing foul, right? And then play stops. Receiving fouls, the second category. Receiving fouls, any time that there's interference via contact with an opponent in attempting to make a play on a disc, right? So if these sort of fouls are committed typically by defense in trying to prevent a catch being made by an offensive cutter, right? So if you're downfield, you're cutting, and the person defending you interferes in some way with physical contact that's not incidental in trying to prevent you from making a play on the disc, that's a receiving foul, right? If you're running and they suddenly stop it and you have to bump into them because you simply can't get out of the way, that's a foul. Or if they're grabbing your shirt or otherwise sort of bumping into you, or there's physical contact that's not incidental, you'll know it when you feel it, right? You can make a receiving foul call. You just say foul, right? Now, the person who you are saying is fouling you, they can say, well, I contest that call because I don't think I was fouling you. And if the receiving foul, if you feel like you're being fouled and they, when there's a play on the disc and they agree, they don't contest, they say you're right, then you retain possession of the disc where the infraction took place, right? If you are met with disagreement and the defender says, I didn't foul you, that was pretty clean, that felt clean. If the disc was not completed, if the pass was not completed, it reverts back to the thrower. It's pretty simple, right? So if the pass is complete after you call a foul, you just play on. But if it's an incomplete pass, then you say foul, and your defender can say, oh yeah, I agree, and then you get the disc right there. If they say, I disagree, then you send it back to the thrower. Important to receiving fouls is this notion of principle of verticality. So if you're going deep for a disc, or there's a disc that's thrown really high and you have to jump for it, your defender needs to respect the vertical space above you and not impinge upon that, or sort of interfere with your vertical movement to play the disc. So 2, 3, 4 people going deep for a disc in an end zone, for example, everyone can jump vertically, and yes, you're moving sideways, you're running, so there's going to be some momentum involved. But no one can sort of place an arm over another person's shoulder or reach across another person's vertical space, creating contact. You can always reach over someone if you don't touch them and grab the disc, right? But physical contact should not take place above, a person trying to make a play on the disc. Everyone is sort of entitled to that vertical space above them where they won't be met with physical contact, okay? Another receiving foul that can happen is called a force-out foul, and this is simply where if you are going up for a catch near an end zone, near a perimeter line, an out-of-bounds line, and in doing so, you're sort of in midair, forced out of bounds when you had jumped from inbounds. You make the catch, but then you land out of bounds because of physical contact with your defender. Then you can just say, well, that was a force-out foul. I was forced out. And then the goal is awarded, or possession is retained. Okay, blocking fouls happen as well. This is simply a case where your defender is getting in the way or moving solely to prevent you, or otherwise take a position that is unavoidable, prevent you from taking a position that's unavoidable, right? So people, when you're on offense, you're running to try and get open downfield, and a defender sort of consistently puts their body in your path and slows down or stops. That's a blocking foul. They can't get in the way solely, to prevent you from getting in a position or taking a position, especially if it's unavoidable, right? If you're moving in a straight line, they can't get in your way and stop or slow you down, or you're entitled to be running in the direction on offense that you desire. Finally, there's the strip call. Simply the case of, if you have a disc in your hands, you have possession, you've stopped rotation, and then the defense interacts with the disc in such a way as to knock it out of your hand, you just call strip. And play typically stops, and it goes to the possession is retained by the thrower, and after it's resolved, you play on. Okay. Another type of sort of infraction that can happen on the field is called a pick. And this, I think, vocabulary-wise, comes probably from basketball, right? And this is a pick is a call that's made only by an only by a defensive player. Okay. And this is only called downfield from the disc. So a pick is a call made downfield when a defensive player feels obstructed by an offensive player, right? When they're trying to sort of catch up with the person they're defending, someone else runs in their path and they have to avoid or stop this person. So if you're downfield, you're on defense, madly chasing, your cutter around, trying to prevent position, trying to get them out of the throwing lanes. And as you're chasing them, suddenly another offensive player, and defensive for that matter, but really offensive players are it's sometimes inadvertent or accidental. It's not intentional. A pick doesn't have to be intentional. It can be accidental, right? Suddenly someone runs into your path downfield from the disc and prevents you from catching up to your person. It creates an unfair advantage for that receiver that you were supposed to be defending. So you can yell pick, play stops, and people return to the position they were at when the pick was called, so they have to go back a couple steps typically. The person who was picked, the defensive player who was picked and who yelled pick, can then catch up to the person they were defending, right? If pick is called and the disc is in the air, if it's caught, it goes back, and if it's not caught, it just results in a turnover, right? Because the pick disadvantages the defensive team, so if the throw that was in the air during the pick call is a turnover, then it just, that's already a disadvantage to the offensive team. So play stops, but if the other team, if we're on offense and you're about to throw it, or you throw it, or you're cutting downfield and you hear pick, the defensive team calls pick, you want to make sure to catch that disc to retain possession. Otherwise, it's a turnover, right? So again, picks can only be called by the obstructed player in question downfield. And after a stoppage, they can regain position. Everyone takes up position where they originally were. Okay. Travel is a throwing violation of sorts, I guess. Once you have possession of the disc, if you're the person with the disc in your hand, you've got to establish the pivot foot as quickly as possible until that throw is released. So the ball of your pivot foot needs to touch the ground and stay there until the disc is released. If you slide your foot, more than a few inches, or you pick up your foot and bring it back down, that's a travel. Once you catch a disc, if you're in motion, you can't speed up or change direction. That's also a travel. And you're only allowed 3 steps of ground contacts before establishing that pivot foot, right? With travel, play stops, I think. It's not really I'll have to recheck the stall count rules as well, but if there's a travel called, especially if a throw is released, deep, typically the throw comes back. If the travel's contested, there are some specifics there that I have to brush up on before I record, but in any case, when you catch the disc, stop within 3 steps, don't change direction, don't speed up. Okay. One last sort of notion that has to do with etiquette of the game is delay of game. Doesn't happen very often. Shouldn't have to worry about it too much. But sometimes when there's a turnover, the team that takes possession of the disc on a turnover, if they're trying to sort of milk the clock a little bit, let their players set up, get into position before they check the disc in. If they're taking too long, if it's 10 seconds, 15 seconds, you can sort of suggest, hey, delay of game, and that will sort of urge them to get that disc into play, that it's clear they're sort of anytime we're starting or restarting or continuing play. So, also one last thing, getting back to the point of checking the disc into play after a turnover or whatever. If there's a defensive check, checking the disc back into play, like there's a turnover, it goes out of bounds, the other team regains possession. If we are the team that lost possession and the other team is bringing the disc back in to have the marker check the disc and start play again, the mark needs to be sure that their whole team is ready to go and observing that play is about to resume. So just to bring us back to that. So anyway, that's sort of the nuts and bolts of the 11th edition rules of USA Ultimate. So hope that makes sense, and if you have any questions, just talk to me.